Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Hyperconvergence Case Study with Scale Computing. My name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator for today's event. Today's event is brought to you in partnership with Scale Computing, so thank you to Scale for supporting today's event. Now, before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping information that you need to know about. This is a completely live event. We want this to be educational. We encourage you to use the questions box there in the GoToWebinar control panel to ask as many questions as you'd like. We'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the event today. We also have a number of handouts available for download there in your control panel in GoToWebinar. Some really awesome resources. There are 5 different handouts that you can download. The Scale white paper on how HC3 lowers the total cost of infrastructure, the Hyperconverged infrastructure introduction, simplicity engineering with HC3, the executive summary of relentlessly simplifying your IT infrastructure, and the Scale Computing HC3 product report from Trust Radius. So make sure that you download those resources now because they won't be as easily available after today's event. Now, as you can see, today's event is a live video panel discussion. So this should be exciting, should be fun. We will have one Amazon $300 gift card to give away to a lucky attendee on the live event. If you're watching this on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions are at events.actualtechmedia.com. And with that, I'm excited to introduce you to today's presenters. They are Mr. Craig Tiriak, Director of Product Management at Scale Computing, and our star guest today really is Mr. Brad Schneider, who's a Director of IT at Employer Advantage. Brad and Craig, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so before we jump into it, just a little bit of stage setting here I want to talk about because things are changing a lot in the data center. I mean, I was an IT manager for many years, managing the data center, and it didn't look quite this old, but there was some aging technology out there. And I was always excited to find out about new things that could help us to become more efficient, to do more with less, because you might have heard that term before. IT folks are continually pushed to do more with less, and potentially to save the company some money, and to help us in the IT organization, really look like the heroes, if you will, of the company, to show what technology can really do for the company and how technology can really make a difference. So I know many data centers out there are still stuck in the past, but today I think we're going to learn a lot about how hyperconvergence and virtualization and scale computing can really make a huge difference, in today's data centers to gain efficiency, to help you save money, and to make you look like the hero of the IT organization, if you will. You'll learn about the benefits of hyperconverged infrastructure on today's event, how to evaluate hyperconverged infrastructure, and most importantly, real use cases and real stories from Mr. Brad Schneider of Employer Advantage. So we've got a great event lined up. That's my 2 cents, and that's why I feel that today's event and today's topic are so important. Now, before I ask the first question of Brad, I want to quickly bring up a poll, and that poll is coming up here on your screen, and it says, what would you do with the time you freed up from having a simpler IT infrastructure to manage? And as you can see, there's some fun answers in here. You can focus more on strategic projects. You can catch up on season 3 of Westworld. Hopefully you'll finally be able to spend weekends with your family, or maybe you'll browse Reddit. I don't know. But go ahead and answer that question. I'll share the results of that poll with you so you can see how you stack up with your peers on the event today. All right, hopefully you've had a chance to answer that poll. This is the first of 2 polls. We'll have another poll at the end of the event. And again, don't forget to use that questions box there in the GoToWebinar control panel. I see a number of good morning and hello messages already coming in. Thank you for those. Of course, ask your questions about hyperconvergence as well. We want those for our Q&A session at the end of the event. All right, so thank you everyone who responded to that poll. Let me share the results of this fun poll with you. And the results say, good answer. 72% said focus more on strategic projects. So that is the right answer. 16% said spend time with their family. Excellent answer as well. All good answers there. A really fun poll. Thank you to everyone who responded to that. Let me jump over here to our first question now. And the question I want to ask you, Brad, is simply just tell us about Employer Advantage. What do you do there, and what is Employer Advantage?
Sure. Employer Advantage, we're an HR as a service outsourcing company, full spectrum benefits, HR, payroll, even including workplace safety, doing that kind of work. A lot of really passionate people who we support companies from 20 employees up to thousands of employees, and they're the kind of people who get really excited when the Department of Labor comes out with a new finding. I don't fully understand it, but they're really great about helping companies pay their people and take care of their people. And I'm the IT director there, so I'm responsible for basically anything that has a wire in it.
Anything that has a wire in it. Yes, I've had that
Yeah,
job description before as well.
sure.
That's always fun. All right, well, cool. So, I mean, let's move on to question 2, and let's talk about, tell us about the number of people responsible for the IT infrastructure there.
Infrastructure-wise, we actually, prior to Monday, had 3 people, and we actually transitioned one of our guys from infrastructure over to application support because there simply wasn't a need to have him keeping the lights on anymore. And that's in large part due to the implementation of HC3 in our environment. So we're down to 2 now. It's pretty exciting.
Very nice. And that's, to me, one of the key, benefits of hyperconvergence is this ability to, re-task people to make a difference in the company instead of just keeping the infrastructure up and running. And when you say infrastructure, I mean, you mean all infrastructure, like
Oh,
servers,
yes.
storage, networking.
The whole thing, endpoints, even to the point of what we consider infrastructure type tasks, which are, daily reports, the old school infrastructure. We don't print on green bars anymore, but it's a similar thing.
Very nice, very nice. So let's move on to question 3 here. I mean, what type of operational challenges were you really trying to solve when you started looking at hyperconvergence?
Uh, we did have an aging infrastructure. We had a quote next generation SAN, but it was actually replicating to an old JBOD that was in our disaster recovery site. Very typical standard 321 architecture, running a hypervisor on 3 servers with a couple of switches, and then our the SAN. And as you know, with that many moving parts, especially when you talk about software licensing, et cetera, you've just got to have your fingers in every pot, and you've just got to be very mindful. The joke I make is you have to sit there in a state of cat-like readiness. Anything could go wrong at any moment. So we started to look also at some additional M&A type activity, and we needed something that would scale, no pun intended, rapidly and readily. And so it just didn't make sense to embrace that older architecture anymore for us.
Very smart. And I mean, when you talk about the SAN, I mean, I remember when we first put in a SAN in my IT organization, and we had to send a admin away to a class for a week to learn how to just to administer it. And I mean, it was the single most costly, most expensive purchase I think we had ever made in the IT organization.
You
So,
bet.
so what was the feeling like to kind of get yourself rid of that?
Uh, that was actually pretty exciting. I've got to be honest though, firing the company that was responsible for our hypervisor and walking away from that licensing morass that came with it was the most exciting part of it for me.
I like to hear that. That's fun. Okay. So I mean, why hyperconvergence instead of a traditional SAN? Why did you think it's the right model for the future?
Well, since people are relying on us to have historical data going back years and years and years, and you know how labor legislation can be in compliance, all of those exciting words that we love to hear in the IT world, we needed something exceptionally resilient. We needed something that we could stack and grow as there was a need. And like I said, we're in growth mode right now. We're actually building a new building. We're working with new companies to bring them kind of into the fold, and we needed that flexibility. So you know, anybody who's done a standard stack knows that yeah, sure, you can rack more servers and you can rack more storage and that kind of thing. But when you get it all just node for node for node, I mean, we're not a large business. We're not in the state where we're going to be racking nodes with Velcro so that we can rapidly pull them out. You know, where we have like a whole wall of nodes. But we needed to take that story writ small and make it work well for us.
Okay, I think that's important. So hyperconvergence makes it easier to grow and scale up. Have you found it to be very scalable?
Incredibly. And also, what's nice is we get to kind of cherry pick where we throw resources. So, you know, we found out that we actually had a little bit more storage. We had one project that had faded off, and so we had more storage available to us. So, 2 clicks of the mouse, and we were able to change our retention settings to have even more security and more archiving capability. We were leveraging what we had. If down the road we decide to walk that back, 2 more clicks of the mouse, and we're back where we were before, but we don't have those resources available to us. So the flexibility shouldn't be overlooked.
I like that. Yeah, policy, storage policy-based management. I mean, no LUN provisioning, LUN restriping, anything like that. Just click a few clicks of the mouse and you've changed the
Yeah,
storage
I
profile
mean,
there.
truthfully, the weakest link in the whole chain is the OS now.
Okay. Okay. Great point. Let's see. So we got a lot of good questions here. Let's keep moving. Which vendors did you consider before choosing Scale Computing HC3?
Well, there's a really good way to make a case, and one is to get a number for what you are already doing, right? So I reached out to a big vendor and said, look, I need a 3-2-1 stack to match 1-to-1 exactly what I've got. That gave me my baseline number. And then below that, we also compared with VxRail on the Hyperconverged front. We also compared with Nutanix. And we even did a little research into rolling our own with our HHI. And you know, that's a time versus money proposition. Sure, if you have a Red Hat expert who's willing to live and die with it, maybe that's doable, but I don't think we were in that situation. So it's kind of interesting when we started to massage the numbers, I was shocked, and this is taking personnel costs out of the picture entirely. I was shocked by how much lower it came in. I mean, it was one of those, I started making phone calls to other scale customers saying, look, my numbers aren't making sense here. Did I forget how to add? And they would always come back and say, yeah, that was my reaction the first time. And since we've rolled it out, it's made complete sense.
Very nice, very nice. And that's one of the things I've always respected about Scale is just upfront, open pricing. It's on a slide in every event that Scale is on. Um, Craig, do you want to talk for just a minute about your approach with that? I mean, from what I understand, there's no different various editions of Scale. Is that right?
Yeah, it's funny you say we do include that slide in just about everything. I don't think we actually have it in the slides today, but if you go to our website, you'd probably be able to dig it up. Yeah, our pricing, we try to be as transparent as possible. And the way it works is you start with 3 like nodes for high availability, and you can scale out from there. And you can really mix and match node types. Every node that you buy includes 1 year of our scale care support and warranty, as well as the licensing you need. So no extra VMware licensing or anything to go out and worry with in that 3-2-1 model that Brad was talking about.
Very nice. I like that. Just simple, open, upfront, honest. It makes it easy. I mean, as an IT manager, I always struggled when these large companies come in with 6 experts to present us a, a 100-slide PowerPoint presentation on, their solution when it could be just so simple and straightforward. I like that. So, I mean, what were the top purchasing drivers for buying an HC3 system?
Well, like I said, we did that TCO analysis, and one thing I will urge anyone who goes through that activity to do, look at it in a 5-year box. Don't look at your initial purchase, because the competitors will sometimes ramp their licensing costs on you, and you need to be mindful of that. But my conservative numbers, I'm just looking at them here, we suggested about a 53% savings versus our standard 3-2-1 stack. So to replace like for like with what we had, this is not improving anything. This is just taking, getting new badging on the exact same boxes. Basically, we were going to pay 53% more, or I guess we would have paid over double what we're looking at with the scale offering. So that does not factor in the time you save, the personnel costs, the human capital. So that's a pretty persuasive argument.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's the hard dollar savings that you're talking about there, and then
Mm-hmm.
like you alluded to there, all the soft dollar, efficiency savings that are kind of hard to put a price tag on. But you said
Really,
you were able to retask an entire staff member. Is that right?
yeah, and not just that, but think of the risers tied to licensing in the other model. We had talked earlier about growth. I want to buy a new node. Like you said, when you get that invoice, it's like 3 lines. That's it. The node, the software, the license. That's it. And so if I wanted to buy a new node, I've got a really good idea of how much that's going to cost me. If I pick up the phone and call another hypervisor vendor and say, "Hey, yo, I need more," I know that's when they really turn the screws. I mean, experience tells me that. So I really appreciate that linearity. I appreciate the way that the scale works, and that was a big part of our thought process here. Is like, gosh, you have to pull out the 5-year crystal ball in the old model and go, gosh, what am I going to need in 2025? And then you got to buy accordingly and maybe have underused equipment. So this made a lot more sense in that context for us.
Absolutely. And when new features come out, I understand they're just included when you upgrade. It's, I mean, kind of like the iPhone model. A new iOS comes out, you get the new features. It's not like, would you like to, pay for the new super platinum
Right.
plan to get these new features?
Exactly. And then you have to talk, okay, well, now I've got 3 nodes, but I maxed out on what that license will get me. So when I get the 4th node, then I've got to go to enterprise. None of that is part of the top scale.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, let's see, move on to number 7 here. So tell us about the number of virtual machines, like what's running in the environment.
Sure. All in, we've got about 43 boxes running, various OSs. Some of my favorites are the Linux boxes, of course, because they're sparing and they just work. The other ones I still have to support. That's just life. But we've got large SQL servers. We got file server. We actually are running an Exchange server locally. We've got some legacy software, and that was kind of interesting. Running legacy software on scale, what I noticed was I didn't have to throw a lot more resources at it because of the back end management. It was like I would get calls from our accounting teams like, you put a hood scoop on this server, how is this so much faster? And I said, well, honestly, in terms of core commit, in terms of RAM commit, in terms of storage, it's the same. It's just a more efficient way to deliver the processing that it needs.
That's interesting to hear. So you got a performance boost as well.
Yeah, out of nowhere. In fact, after I had done the migration for the file server, I had one of our benefits people. They live with these massive documents. If you've ever signed up for benefits, it's about like a mortgage, right? You've got this much paper, and so they've got just scads of this information on our file server. And I thought she was going to kiss me. She was like, I don't know what you did, but when I pulled up these PDFs of these massive documents, they just work now, whereas I used to have to go get coffee in between and that kind of thing. So yeah, and that was, it, you know, it made me look like I wear a cape, and all I did was go, you go over here. You know.
I love that story. I mean, because that's a great example of making, you know, IT professionals into the kind of the technology hero of the company. I mean, and
You
that's the
bet.
place we want to be, not the department of no, you know, as we've been called in some cases.
Yeah.
So, okay, very cool. So, Yumi, what do you see as the biggest benefits of scale, if you were to summarize it?
Well, obviously, simplicity of deployment, simplicity of support, and I'll add scale support is actually tremendous. Do you mind if I riff on a little story here? Uh,
Please.
one of the nodes we received from the manufacturer was actually a lemon. We had in our 3-node set, we had one node that it looked like it was a bad power supply initially, and then it turns out that it was a manufacturing defect on the motherboard. We didn't have to go down that whole path. It was, I mean, we took a reasonable step. We replaced the power supply that didn't solve the problem, and immediately the scale guys were like, let's just get you another node. We could diagnose this until the cows come home. Let's just fix this. And what was nice is all of the machines that we had already moved over ran swimmingly on the other 2 nodes while we did the switch. It was, you know, 30 minutes of work to rack it and swap the drives, turn it back on, and then add it back to the cluster. And we were back in business. And that was the least hassle I have ever had with a server replacement in my entire career.
So there's no finger pointing between the virtualization vendor and this server vendor and the storage
Right.
vendor. In this case, there was just one back to pat, as I know Craig has said before, right, Craig? Instead of one throat to choke, it's one back to pat.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and
So,
go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say the experience was tremendous to the point where I was a little surprised, like, you know, why was this that easy? You know, like what and I bought a lottery ticket that day, so that was good. But no, it was a really tremendous experience. So if that is the norm for scale support, to me, that's the gold standard.
I like that story. Yeah. Craig, do you want to tell us a little bit about the scale support group?
Yeah, happy to. Well, first of all, they're based in Indianapolis, Indiana, so that's where we're headquartered. They are, you know, a group of people that are just passionate about technology. They love helping our customers. We consistently receive Net Promoter Score up in the 90s. I think the latest is 90, 91, right in that range. And I think part of it is, yeah, they're an exceptional group of people, but we've also set them up for success, and that we've built in the tools we need to be able to remotely diagnose things quickly. We do this, you know, as Brad was saying, that advanced replacement on critical parts where we can kind of take the heat off of the situation by getting a new node, new replacement quickly, and then on the back end, diagnose it locally by us without having the customer to have to be, you know, down for any period of time during that diagnosis. That's kind of, you know, how the entire company is set up. Really, is that support and services that's included with the price of the nodes is really intended to be as important as the hardware and software that we sell. I mean, it really is an extension of our company, and so such a critical piece to making.
I like that. Yeah, to me, that's one of the best benefits of the scale computing solution is that support. So yeah, thank you for sharing that story, Brad. Let's move on here. Next question. How much faster are you able to recover from a hardware failure running a critical workload with high availability built into HC3? Have you had a chance to see that in action yet, Brad?
Oh yeah, we actually use it all the time. That's sort of an interesting question because we were woefully over-engineered before. So I'll be honest, the speed's about the same, but what's nice is I have 3 vendors from the chain of how we got that speed. So this is just baked into the scale platform. So really, like if I have a complete failover event where I go from our production site to our DR site, that's technically reboot speed for one of those affected servers. So I can move that production load from one site to another at the speed of a single reboot. And that's without any specialized knowledge for this particular backup that does this particular replication that stands up this standby or any of that. It just does it in the background on a schedule and works.
Very nice. And it's just built in to the solution. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. And so the replication from node to node, and I'm sure tell me if I get any of this wrong, please, Craig, but the replication of node to node is baked in. So they're aware of one another. It's what we used to call a stretch or metro cluster, or an extended cluster. It's asynchronous. It happens in the background. It's invisible, and it doesn't impact the performance of the VMs.
And I've heard of this. I know we're going to talk about use cases later, I think, so I might be getting ahead of myself. But I've heard of this as being one of the primary use cases or triggers for companies to put in scale, because it just makes DR so easy. Have you seen that, Craig?
Yeah, actually, it was funny. I'm kind of preparing for the webinar here. I was looking back through a bunch of surveys that we'd done to figure out percentages wise that I could throw out, just to add context around what Brad was saying. And I would say that's one of the top 3 reasons that we hear for people deciding on scale. Maybe top 4 actually. I think it's about 61%. So that it's around solving or improving disaster recovery and business continuity type of issues that people were trying to solve for. Ahead of that, it's really the ease of use, the enabling virtualization without any complexity at 72%, and reduced time spent managing infrastructure is right behind that. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those common things. In fact, it's funny that I would say most people, when they aren't out there trying to solve the DR solution, they see that and think, oh, that actually, there are other things in my infrastructure that I didn't realize I could replace by augmenting with the snapshots and replication functionality that's just built into HC3. So what Brad was saying is, yeah, I mean, it's basically on a per virtual machine basis. I can set up replication to any other scale cluster, even scale node. You don't necessarily have to have a 3-node system for that DR target. You can kind of set it up as often as every 5-10 minutes or so to be able to take snapshots, send them over the wire. We can press that data before it goes over. That receiving end, of course, could also be HC3 Cloud Unity. So we've got a partnership with Google and a kind of a cloud-based disaster recovery as a service that allows you to replicate your virtual machines to Google. And then if there is a failure of some sort at the primary site, you can fail over to that secondary site really seamlessly. I'm kind of curious, Brad, do you test your DR failover capabilities very often? I know it's fairly easy to do, and I know a lot of our customers do that pretty regularly because of that.
Yeah, we're actually a SOC 2 shop, and so part of our compliance testing is our auditors kind of spin a wheel and pick a couple of machines for us to restore and prove to them that they're back up and functional. And so that's it's more often than I would care to admit. It's about quarterly that seems to happen. But no, this has simplified that process tremendously.
Very cool.
Absolutely, great points. And I should handle this question that came in right now. They're asking, is Craig in a car? The answer is yes. He's probably out helping a scale customer right now. So thank you for joining us.
Actually, yeah, I am in my home office right now with 2 kids and a dog inside. This is the quietest room that I could possibly work from home at in our new world that we live in.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you for taking time to join us from the new home office there. So another question here, how much faster are you able to recover from a hardware? We covered that one already. Let's move on. By what percentage did your HC3 deployment reduce the time your IT staff spent on managing infrastructure? I don't know if you can estimate a percentage like that, Brad.
Well, that was an interesting one. It was a little bit of a mind bender. So I look back. Let's just start with the fact that we went from 3 guys down to 2 guys. So there's 33% off the top, right? And then as I looked at our tracking, our ticket system, I would say quantifiably it's 45%, but going by feel, I would guess it's closer to 65%, because even, you know how it is, you get in and there's a small problem that you solve and like, well, this guy knows how to work with the backup software, so he takes care of that and just doesn't even tell anybody else. Or this guy, there's a SAN problem, so he takes care of that and doesn't. So, my German Shepherd is happy to be part of this. So honestly, it really does feel like I'm spending 2/3 less time keeping the lights on.
Wow, that's a huge improvement there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and just even with the most efficient 3-2-1 build that you can make, if every vendor's aware of every other vendor and everything just magically works, there's still a fair number of moving parts that you have to manage.
Absolutely. I mean, and I know at a lot of companies, the infrastructure group is kind of broken down into those three silos: storage, network, and servers, or server OS, virtualization. And I mean, if you're able to eliminate that SAN, there's like a 1/3, improvement right there.
Right.
So I can believe it. I can believe it. So I guess let's move now. This question is for Craig. Craig, why don't you just tell us? I mean, we've learned a lot about how scale computing helped Brad at Employer Advantage specifically, but what can you tell us about scale overall?
Yeah, so Scale was founded back in 2008, actually around a storage product that we first came out with. And then in 2012, we first launched our HC3 product. I mean, basically at the advent of the term hyperconvergence in general, we were right there. We are based in Indianapolis, as I said. That's where our support team is. That's where our CEO and some of the other administrative staff is. We've got our inside sales team there. I'm actually based out in California, here in my car, as I said. We are really thought of in a couple different ways. Oftentimes, you'll hear people talk to us as the SMB focused company. It's slightly broader than that. I would say our focus is pretty maniacally on just simplifying the basically the architecture, or the infrastructure that you need to be able to run critical workloads anywhere that's outside of the four walls of the data center. If that's an SMB customer, that applies, but it also applies in things like edge computing and distributed enterprises. So we're starting to see a lot of growth in that area. In terms of where we focus, I would say things like healthcare, education, financial services, manufacturing is a very big segment for us, as is local government, retail, that sort of thing. So that's at a high level, who we are as a company and how long we've been around, what we've been through. The other thing you'll also hear synonymous with HC3 is that we are not VMware based. We've kind of implied that through this entire presentation today, but just kind of call it out pretty candidly. We have our own KVM based hypervisor that we've integrated directly with storage that doesn't require you to license things outside of our infrastructure.
Okay. So what about, we talked about disaster recovery as being an ideal use case, greater efficiency. What else? What other use cases are we missing?
Well, I think the obvious one is just standard data center virtualization for that SMB customer, right? So Brad's case, 43 VMs, I think you said. We typically see, from 20 to 100 virtual machines for most of our customers, 1 to 5 IT administrators. You start to get above that is where you start to see that specialization in areas of the stack. But really, anywhere that there's a critical workload that downtime means that business will grind to a halt, we see success. We even have customers that are running, 1 or 2 virtual machines, and then some customers that are running hundreds. That runs the gamut, of course. Other use cases are edge computing. So where you've got hundreds of sites, none of which have any IT administrators on site. That is definitely an area that we're starting to see a lot of success in, retail specifically. I mean, grocery retailers right now are just getting slammed with people coming through their doors as they're preparing for the kind of current state of the world. And they're trying to be able to give the same experience that a customer would have going online these days. And so that's who they're competing with. So they need in-store infrastructure to be able to handle that. And we're starting to see that just all over in these larger distributed enterprises. And then the last one, again, working from my car today, I'll call out virtual desktop, right? So virtual desktop infrastructure is a big one right now. And how do you enable customers to be able to allow their employees to work from home in a quick and easy manner? And we've got partnerships that kind of help us along on the broker side to be able to manage all of the various people that might be logging in. And of course, we're a perfect platform for the infrastructure side of that kind of hand in hand provides a really ease of use story to be able to get up and running quickly.
Absolutely. And I mean, one of the triggers, or maybe two of the triggers that I would guess would be common entry points for scale would be when a SAN is up for, hardware refresh. You've got an aging SAN that needs replacing. Maybe you've outgrown it, or it's just old. Every 3 to 5 years kind of thing. Or a virtualization software maintenance renewal is up for another contract. Is that common, Craig?
Yeah. In fact, as I was mentioned earlier, when I was preparing for this, I was just kind of going through some of our statistics. If you go into Tech Validate, you'll see all sorts of various case studies, and we try to aggregate those together to give a broader view of what it is our customers are seeing. Infrastructure refresh is by far the number one kind of top purchasing driver from customers. Just like Brad was saying with his SAN coming up at the end of life or need to be refreshed, that's usually the driver. I think 85% of our customers are in that situation where they're having to replace some part of their stack and looking for a solution to simplify the whole thing. And that's when they come to us.
Okay. Excellent. So, I mean, Brad talked about the benefits of scale from his perspective. What do you see as the most common benefits of scale from your perspective, Craig?
Ease of use is right there at the top. Anytime you can put in infrastructure that actually saves you time to allow you to work on the other things that you want to. While 6% of you, I think, said that you would go out and watch Westworld, the 72% or something like that, where it's all around taking on a new project. I know there for a while, everybody I talked to said, "Oh, I can't believe I got this infrastructure in place. I can now go deploy Windows 10 across my environment that I've always wanted to do and never had time." And we see stories like that fairly commonly. Right behind that is the scalability. We'll try to talk people through this as we're entering the sales cycle with them to say, or the buying cycle when we say, think through the next 5 years, what is it you need? With an infrastructure the way we've built it, you really only need to start with what matches your environment today, knowing you can add additional nodes later on. And again, the transparency and pricing we talked about earlier kind of adds into that. But being able to mix and match node types, even across generations of Intel processors, allows you to buy what you need today, knowing you can buy in the future at a really easy way. So you simply just add this thing into the rack and assign it an IP address, and we aggregate the storage into the cluster and kind of bring it up and running. So that process becomes a lot easier than having to figure out the licensing or having to figure out the hardware compatibility matrix of various vendors that all have to work together. The last one is so what did I talk about? I talked about the ease of use, speed of implementation. I mean, I think is another big one that you can really get up and running on this fairly quickly. We often will advertise it as an hour or less, and that's usually to get the infrastructure up and start to create virtual machines. Most of our customers within a few days have their critical workloads already moved on to us, and they're off and running. And then the last point I would just bring up, which again is implied in all of this, is why do you need this infrastructure is to provide high availability. So, if things fail all the time, whether it's a hard drive or a node or in a host in a 3-2-1 environment, the reason you have that SAN or NAS in there is to be able to provide high availability for the application, so that if there is some sort of hardware failure, you're protected against it. That goes without saying. This is kind of critical for us and one of the core tenets in our design.
Okay, excellent. Let's see. What would you say differentiates scale from other vendors out there, Craig?
That's a really good question. I think it's really two things. I think we've always had a maniacal focus on a very targeted use case, and because of that, we can assure that we have the right feature set for that use case. So historically, I would have said SMB, and I would broaden that now to just say anywhere that there's critical workloads that don't have a lot of IT resources on site to deal with infrastructure. So that fits both SMB as well as edge infrastructure. That's by far our claim to fame. And when you hear the name scale computing, even if you go out and look on Gartner, you'll see us listed as a niche player, which we're proud of. We're absolutely a niche player. This is our niche. We SMB and edge computing, and that's where we are successful, and that's where our customers are happiest. The other thing I would call out is our architectural decision to include KVM as our hypervisor, our KVM-based hypervisor in with our solution versus VMware. That's allowed us to do a few things. I think the top of the list is that we've integrated in such a way that's extremely efficient. So while most of the other vendors out there that you'll see in this hyperconvergent space are using a third-party hypervisor, because of that, they have what's called a virtual storage appliance model. So they've got a controller virtual machine that sits on every host or every node in the system, and that's consuming somewhere between 24, 32 gig of RAM up to 100 gig of RAM per node. In smaller environments, and I would say smaller in terms of SMB as opposed to enterprise, that adds up to dollars. And so we're able to, with our integration, use a fraction of a core and maybe 4 gig of RAM or less per node to be able to provide our operating system, which means that the rest of those resources are available to run the workloads that you need. So that's definitely true in the SMB environment. In an edge environment where you've got hundreds of sites, that just is exacerbated. It just gets multiplied out site by site, and it really adds up.
Okay. Okay.
David, if I may,
Yeah,
this
please.
actually ties to a question that someone had the question is, Brad mentioned comparing other vendors, Nutanix and others, to the scale technology. How did each stacked up? Do you mind if I address that briefly?
Please do.
I mean, this is my perspective. That way, Craig doesn't get his hand slapped or whatever. If cost was our number one driving factor, we would have gone with our HHI, right? We would have rolled our own open source, and that would have been the number one. So obviously, cost is a consideration, but when we looked at VxRail, that wasn't converged enough for our tastes. They call it hyperconverged, but it didn't have the same flavor. Nutanix, actually, from an architectural standpoint, had some similarities. The Acropolis hypervisor is actually pretty robust. But if you talk about the overhead that Craig just mentioned with the management VM on each of the nodes, plus there's some other sort of quibbly architectural things that I had an issue with, plus the cost, scale came out a clear winner, at least for us.
Okay. Very, very insightful to hear. I mean, that's we don't get to hear these types of stories often enough. So thank you for sharing that with us. Let's see. Other questions coming in. Actually, before we handle those, let's wrap up these other questions here. What should people do if they want to give scale computing a try? First, I'll give that to Brad. Brad, how did you do a proof of concept? How did you get started with scale?
Actually, it was interesting. I had gone to a show where Scale was presenting. The show's focus was on SMB. It was on my specific, not the PEO or HR market, but specific to the size of company that we are. And those poor guys at the show, I drilled them with questions for about 2 straight days, and they were, I loved it. They had a cluster right there, and they let me go hands-on and try to break it, and I gave it my best, and I didn't manage. So I thought, hey, if I can't break it, it must be pretty well designed. So that was literally how I did it. It was almost like a show and tell time for me.
Yeah, that's really powerful to actually try for yourself. Craig, what options do you usually recommend?
Before I go through the options, I just have to say one of my favorite things to do with those trade shows, Brad, is to just pull the plug on a node and watch the VMs fail over. I will challenge any other vendor out there to do it, because it really is a test of the architecture. And if you have the confidence to be able to do that, it means that it really is architected in such a way that you're expecting that failure. So anyway, I love doing that, and I love the reaction that people have when we do it. I mean, in terms of options to try it, I would say as a first step, come to our website, www.scalecomputing.com. I think you've got that on a slide coming up. We do have a weekly demo where allows you to get on, ask questions, see the UI. Sometimes we'll even pass over control to let people click around and ask their questions as they're playing with it. We also have a handful of other options to be able to remotely get in and try these things out as customers want to do that. What I found more often than not, though, is hearing customers like Brad come and tell their story, going out to trustradius.com or Tech Validate and some of these other sources where we've got hundreds, literally 500 or 600 different case studies of customers using this, that the question goes from, will this work for my business, to Basically let's talk through what the implementation time looks like. Let's talk through more the specifics around my environment versus the general will it work, because I think that's been answered by the market so far.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, I love all those options. Being able to try it for yourself is just so powerful. I want to remind everyone, make sure that you download the handouts that are available there in your audience console. The Trust Radius report is in there based on 240 reviews and ratings of scale computing HC3 on Trust Radius. So make sure you download that as well as the use cases and other architectural white papers and technical documents that are available for download there. And yes, we have the URL on the slide there on the screen, scalecomputing.com for more information. And now let me bring up this final poll question, and then we'll do some Q&A with the audience. So the question on the screen is, do you have plans to refresh your infrastructure in the next 12 months? A simple yes or no. And so first question that I wanted to ask that came in here is about migration. Brad, how did you migrate virtual machines from your previous virtualization platform and SAN into scale computing, and what was that process like?
For us, we cherry picked. There are two ways that we thought would be acceptable to do it. One is to use software to do the migration. It's now called Carbonite Replication. Is that correct, Craig?
We rebranded as HC3 Move, but the underlying product, yeah, it's Carbonite Move, and I think that they were recently acquired by a company called OpenText, but I don't think they rebranded it. So
I don't have a program, so it's hard to keep track. But that software that comes at a cost, and the licensing is actually fairly reasonable. But we only had 5 really heavy hitter VMs that we felt like we needed to have that relentless uptime. Our file server, our primary domain controller, SQL server, an application server that served our financial folks, that kind of thing. And so we used that. It worked perfectly. It would do a chase and replication, and then when I decided to do the cutover on a Saturday because I wanted to impact people as little as possible. When I did the cutover, re-IP'd, changed the names, did everything, and everything spun back up exactly as it should have. So that was one. For the remainder, we were able to power them off, and it's a very, very simple process to export the VM file to a file share and then kind of pull it in to the HC3 stack, and it just works. Once you fire it up, then you can actually enhance the capabilities of the VM by adding the HC3 specific software, changing the way the storage is addressed, changing the way the network is addressed. But that's a very simple process, and for anything barring a very large data store, it's not very time consuming.
Okay, that sounds really easy, and I'm impressed personally that you moved your file server into the virtualization platform, because when I was managing a virtual infrastructure, that was like the last single physical host still running was the file server. It was just too big, too important. No, we can't move it. So I think that's impressive.
Well, thank you. And I actually had, just full disclosure, we had that discussion, and I had to like turn the question around on it. I was like, you're telling me it's so important that we shouldn't move it, but doesn't that mean it's so important that we have to, you know?
Yeah, great point. Great point. Craig, do you want to add anything to that about migration or third-party data protection or anything related to scale?
Yeah, I would say so. What Brad experienced is pretty common. A handful of critical workloads that you want to minimize the downtime on. We've got the HC3 Move product that does really well with those workloads and does exactly what Brad went through. There is the export import option. There are a couple of open source tools like Clonezilla that are an option. What we see a lot of customers do for those non-critical workloads that they just want to migrate whenever. Well, actually, 2 things that I see non-critical workloads do. Number one is rebuild from scratch to get rid of all the cruft from the last IT director that had been running it and had a bunch of whiz-bang things in there that you no longer want around. And then the other one is simply just using bare metal restore with whatever your your backup provider of choice is. So kind of take your backup, restore it into HC3 into a virtual machine running on us. And in terms of other third-party partnerships, we do have a very close relationship with Carbonite. Obviously, with the HC3 Move product, we also have a very close relationship with Acronis. Right now, we actually do resell their product that's currently agent-based, and we're working on an agentless version of that backup product with them that's likely going to be out later this year.
Okay, excellent. Another question here I wanted to make sure we cover is around the time to ramp up, kind of the learning curve and training. Brad, what was the learning curve like? Do you have to send someone to a special class, or what was that? How was that like?
No, that's funny. Actually, when I turned over the keys to one of our older engineers, he fired it up and he was like, "That's it." I'm like, "Yeah, that's it. But that's all you need to manage the stuff, And he's like, "But what if I want to?" And I said, "Yes, we can write Python scripts to do all those things if you have a need, but for now, let's just turn on some VMs." And he's like, "You're right." So I think I would call it the UI. I would call it a minimum effective dose of user input. So you have the tools you need to do the job, and in some cases, it's good not to have the tools that you don't need, because then you don't mess up things that are working.
I like that. So you have the controls you need, and maybe if you need some advanced features, they're there somewhere, but
Yes.
you don't have a 3-page scrolling list of advanced things to configure just to spin up a virtual machine.
Right, and scale support is really good. They've got these rolling classes. It's a serial series of classes where you take one and then the next one opens up, and so you're presented the correct information in the correct order.
Okay. And Craig, do you want to chime in on that? Do many customers need training or consultants to get scale up and running?
No, you really don't. That's kind of one of the big draws to this is that I often joke with people as I give them the demonstrations, like, congratulations, you're now officially certified on HC3, because there really isn't a lot to the user interface. It's kind of a set it up once, and you're gonna put it in the server room or server closet in some cases, and just kind of forget about it, and know that your workloads are going to be running with high availability and everything you want from them. If you do have to log in, though, it has to be as simple as possible because of that set it and forget it mentality. You don't want to have to relearn everything every single time you go in. So it's nice big buttons of create VM, migrate VM, that sort of thing, and as intuitive as we could possibly make it, considering the complexity of what's going on under the hood. One of the things that we will often talk about in these demonstrations is just the intelligence that we built into the platform. So we're monitoring somewhere in the neighborhood of thousands of 1,000, 1,500 conditions per per node in the system, and all of those are fed into state machines. So these state machines say, what's my current state, what's my desired state, and what's the path I need to get to from point A to point B in a safe way, which if any of you have played around with, clustering in general, it's not easy. So there's a lot of complexity under the hood that's going on. Meanwhile, what's presented to the end user is this simplistic, here are the basics of what you need to get to, and then, as Brad said, if there are more advanced features like networking, that sort of thing that you don't have to do every day, you can get into there and still do that sort of thing, but you aren't, it isn't pushed down your throat every single second of being logged in.
Very nice. I like that approach. Congratulations, you're a scale computing HC3 admin. Another question that came in here, they're asking about what's new at scale. And so, Craig, could you tell us a little bit about, I heard something about an Intel NUC node. Is that available? Why did you all create that?
Well, yeah, so it's our HE150. It is a small single drive server, we'll call it, but it's a node in our lingo here, and each of those can do up to 64 gig RAM and a 6-core processor. And while it is really, really small, it works. Actually, what we're finding, so we brought it to market around this edge computing use case, right? So hundreds of sites, each site's requirements are fairly minimal, but any additional overhead that's spent on the hardware itself is money that should be sent somewhere else in the organization. So we brought it to market around this edge computing use case, but what we're finding is that even in small and mid-sized companies, there are use cases that don't really fall into a data center use case. And so until this platform was available, there really wasn't a solution out there for it. So we're seeing that as a really successful deployment methodology. Somewhat related to that is, when we talk about IT administrators between 1 and 5, we often leave off the 0, right? So customers that have an MSP that's providing their infrastructure for them or providing the services for their IT needs. And a lot of managed service providers are taking to this HE150 platform just to deploy across all of their, what I call their single server clients, where they typically would just buy a single server for them. Well, now they can, for roughly the same price as a single server, provide high availability for a handful of applications on these small devices. They are pretty slick to see. Other interesting things that are kind of going on is we've released a API. So if there are more advanced things that you want to do with that API to be able to script up using PowerShell or whatever it is you want to do to interact with the cluster programmatically, that is now available as well. And I know we're running out of time here, but being in charge of the roadmap at scale, I could go on this for hours. So if anybody has questions, feel free to hit me up and I'd be happy to walk them through what we're going through roadmap. And Brad, that extends to you as well. I'd love to go through it.
Thank you.
Very cool, very exciting stuff coming out of Scale. One of the questions that came up here, and I think might be a common misunderstanding with the architecture of Scale, is when you deploy a Scale cluster, do you have to deploy a centralized management, say VM, that manages and controls all these nodes, or how does that work, Craig?
I'm glad you asked, actually. Yeah, that is a very common misunderstanding, because that's kind of the way it's always been done. Is there's one of our employees in the CTO office of the CTO always calls it his mother-in-law server. It's always around. It's there that you got to deal with. I love my mother-in-law, so I won't say that. But I will say with us, it's basically the management UI is built into the nodes themselves, and so you basically just point your browser, HTML5 based browser. I usually use Chrome, Firefox, something like that. Point that to the IP address of one of the nodes in the system, and you're presented with your cluster in its entirety. So there's no separate management interface, no separate management anything really. It's all just built in and accessible to that.
And I really like that functionality, because I know with other solutions, sometimes you have to license that separately. There might be different editions of it. You have to configure high availability for it, and it's a whole big monster to care and feed. With the Scale, it's just built in. It's just part of the solution. So to me, that's very elegant. Well, I know we're running out of time. Before we go, I want to announce the winner of the Amazon $300 gift card. That is Adam Fenton from Georgia. Congratulations. We'll reach out to deliver that gift card. I want to remind everyone, make sure you check out all the handouts, the resources that are available there for download, and also visit scalecomputing.com. Contact them, sign up for your own personal demo, and give the solution a try for yourself. Brad, it's been really powerful and I think compelling and fascinating to hear your story about how you deployed Scale Computing at Employer Advantage. Thank you so much for being on the event today.
No, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk and learn some more as we go.
Absolutely. And thank you, Craig, as always, for joining us on the event today. Always good to have you.
Yeah, you as well. Thanks, David. And thank you, Brad. I really do appreciate you joining as well.
And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us. Hope you learned a lot. Have a great day. Visit scalecomputing.com for more information. See you next time.